Ordinarily, I will not do large, in-depth videos specifically focusing on livery reveals for race cars. Ultimately, no matter how beautiful or how nostalgic a paint scheme or a livery can be, it ultimately is just paint on a race car. It doesn't affect the performance a significant way, one way or another, enough to really warrant any kind of in-depth analysis. That also includes whether or not Fernando Alonso is associated with it, or whether or not I pretty much nailed a prediction back in February of what this F1 ripoff livery would look like. The reason we're talking about this livery reveal today is because of the gigantic Surgeon General warning which adorns the side of the McLaren Racing Indy car. As you will notice, Vuse is first and foremost the primary sponsor on this car. Vuse is an e-cigarette brand which has about 10% of the market share for electronic cigarettes. Now, that being said, this is not a new phenomenon in IndyCar racing. In the past 10 or so years, we have seen a few other companies which produce e-cigarettes take a shot at IndyCar racing, namely Blue and Mystic. However, neither of these companies certainly have the market share, nor do they have the exposure to gain from such a internationally renowned athlete like Fernando Alonso and an internationally renowned team like McLaren. Now, speaking of McLaren, how did this deal come together? Well, at the beginning of this year, they formed a partnership with the tobacco company British American Tobacco. Now, at one point, British American Tobacco owned their own Formula One team, which they named cleverly British American Racing, more commonly known as BAR. They are partnering with McLaren in Formula One using their A Better Tomorrow branding, which is similar to what Ferrari and Philip Morris International are doing with their Mission Winnow campaign. Now, Vuse itself is actually distributed through RJ Reynolds, an American tobacco company. However, it is owned, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but it's owned by British American Tobacco. And you can very clearly see on some of the press images released today that RJ Reynolds, the company name, is very boldly and prominently featured on Fernando Alonso's suit. Now, how significant is RJ Reynolds to this deal? Well, if you think about it, RJ Reynolds is perhaps the most important tobacco company in terms of American motorsports that has ever been. Their primary sponsorship of both NHRA and NASCAR throughout probably from the 70s all the way up to the 2000s, when regulations were such that they could no longer sponsor racing series, was so significant. RJ Reynolds, it has been specifically singled out as one of the major reasons for NASCAR expanding from a Southern-only sport, a Southern American sport, to becoming this almost global phenomenon by the mid-2000s. Now, this, as far as I'm aware, and I've looked into all of RJ Reynolds' products and even British American Tobacco's products, and this appears to be the first time RJ Reynolds or BAT have had a significant IndyCar sponsorship. So, why are we talking about this? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, I feel kind of dutiful, or a sense of duty, so to speak, to be able to tell you guys exactly what this is, where it comes from, and what kind of a product it is. Now, we've seen in the past, and I've talked about in the past, especially when the Mission Winnow thing was going on with Ferrari, that a lot of these tobacco companies are kind of future-proofing themselves. Even now, they are major Fortune 500 companies. They make billions of dollars per year on tobacco sales. But eventually that gravy train is going to dry up. Education has become such that folks know what smoking does, smoking tobacco products, and ultimately, if they're not regulated out of existence, they will be forced out of existence by folks becoming educated to the dangers of tobacco smoking. So what are these companies trying to do? What are they going to do to continue to operate? Well, a lot of them are looking at not necessarily smokeless, but non-tobacco ways of giving nicotine to people. Ultimately, nicotine, as you can see on the Surgeon General warning on the car itself, is a very addictive chemical, which is also found in vapor products. So a lot of times, or at least a lot of the marketing around these vapor products is such that they talk a lot about it being not only a tobacco smoke alternative, but it's also something that they claim can help folks ultimately quit. I'm not so sure about that. That's a lot of marketing spin as far as I'm concerned. I think probably the more legitimate reason you see this out there, obviously, is because you can continue to keep people addicted to the chemical to continue to drive sales. That's a bit harsh, but I don't think there's a lot of mistruths in that. Now, is there a possibility, because we've seen it already this year with A Better Tomorrow and also Mission Winnow. Now, it was in Australia, and from what I understand, obviously considering what happened in Australia with the Australian Grand Prix and both of those companies, they had to remove the branding from their cars. McLaren actually ended up putting 7-Eleven on the cars because British American Tobacco sells a vast majority of their products through 7-Eleven, particularly in Australia, and Ferrari themselves just completely eliminated all of the Philip Morris Mission Winnow branding from their cars. Will something similar happen here in the United States, especially as we kind of ramp up towards the Indy 500 and this race car starts getting the international coverage that I think we're all expecting it to get with the pursuit of the Triple Crown? Fernando Alonso, obviously, he was a media darling the first time he did this, and I think a lot of the media and a lot of the fans are going to be expecting this to be, if not as big, a major event. And obviously, a company like this is able to kind of see the potential, and as I mentioned, the Vuse e-cigarette only has about 10% market share. When they launched in 2013, they were one of the biggest, if not the biggest, e-cigarette producers. They have now been overtaken dramatically by Juuls. And if you have followed any college account or any of those, Barstool accounts, you will know what a Juul is. It's like a meme now, a virally marketed product that has been very successful. And I think you look at RJ Reynolds, they are, I think, the second largest tobacco product producer in the United States. They're looking to get in on this. Now, by putting that Surgeon General warning on there already, they are either already following the laws to a T, and they are essentially safe from some regulator coming in and saying you can't run Vuse on the side of your race car, which is going to be seen on television by millions and millions of people, and even more on the internet as people like me cover this event, and we'll be covering a lot of Fernando Alonso. There's hundreds of thousands of people the last time that watched specifically my content of Fernando Alonso. So that's an enormous amount of press that a company like this could get. Now, American laws generally have been a little bit more loose, or at least less stringent than some other countries. They have become much more strict, specifically talking about tobacco products in more recent years. And, this is going to be my opinion. I don't necessarily have a problem with a company like this advertising. Ultimately, it is a legal product. Now, I do understand if you totally banned it, that it would create an incredibly high black market and ultimately just reward criminals when you can continue to sell it legally but not allow it to be advertised and at least continue to make the tax revenue off it and not necessarily have to throw a bunch of people in jail for selling cigarettes. I understand that part of the argument, but ultimately, you know, and again, part of this is my perspective. I grew up in a time, again, when it was Winston drag racing and the Winston Cup Series, and Formula One had not one but two teams sponsored primarily by Marlboro, and half of the kart grid was funded through tobacco money. I was exposed to all of that. I have never smoked a cigarette in my life, but you know, I saw all that. So I grew up in that era. Some people who may be younger or some people who may be older and never liked it may have a different opinion on that. Do I think it's going to go away or be regulated out or have some federal official come in and say you can't run that? There's a possibility, but it seems the Surgeon General warning, again, it's kind of the tip-off to me that they're essentially playing by the rules here. Obviously, if you're Vuse, you probably don't want a Surgeon General warning on there because you don't want to have to inform people that your product is addictive and could cause somebody to have to spend more money or a certain portion of their budget every week and every month on your product. I mean, obviously, that's their business model. That being said, they've been upfront about it. So either they've cleared it with regulatory agencies or they are kind of making a preemptive strike. And even if they have to take the branding off of there, we already know what the product is. They've already revealed that the car is sponsored by Vuse. So, and it's kind of the thing that happened in Australia. Marlboro and British American Tobacco got way more publicity from having to remove their logos from the car than they probably would have if they just run the race with Mission Winnow and A Better Tomorrow on there. A lot of the times the government will do most of the advertising for the tobacco companies. That's just how it goes. Hopefully, I don't know. I think the best case scenario is that if they just leave it alone, let the car run as it is, because if they go in there and remove it, it's going to become a mainstream media story, and ultimately it's going to defeat the purpose of removing the logos from the car in the first place, because it's going to give Vuse and RJ Reynolds even more exposure, which is ultimately what they're after by sponsoring the biggest draw of this year's Indianapolis 500. But I don't know. What's your thoughts? Let me know them down in the comments. I haven't finished watching the Barber race yet, so that's why my review hasn't come out. If you've already asked that, I've already told you in the comment section, but if you have only watched the video, that's why that hasn't come out. That should be out either tonight or tomorrow. Depends how quickly I can, A, get the race done watched. That's some good dialect there. Get the race watched and then be able to film my analysis and thoughts on it. Though, congratulations to Takuma Sato. That was an awesome win. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar and motorsport content, and I will see you in the next video.